Lambert International used to be one of the busiest airports in America, but after 9/11 and the loss of the American Airlines hub, Lambert is now a mid-sized airport with far fewer direct flights and $1.4 billion in debt. But the people selling St. Louis think they've discovered a way to turn around the struggling airport and the entire region. They call it the big idea.
I think at its essence, the reason it's called the big idea is that it has transformational potential for our region.
That big idea, according to Dick Fleming, is the plan to create a massive international cargo operation at Lambert Airport that he says could pump billions of dollars into our economy. The focus is on Chinese cargo, which is expected to grow much faster than freight shipped from the rest of the world.
The magnitude of what we're talking about here is so substantial.
Fleming says a China hub in St. Louis would also be an ideal spot for South American and Midwest cargo to fill Chinese planes for the flights back to China. According to the RCGA, the hub has the potential to create 18,000 direct, indirect, and induced construction jobs during the next 8 years, and an additional 11,000 permanent jobs to maintain the operation of warehouses and other air cargo related businesses.
I've been involved in economic development for 35 years. The magnitude of this project is greater than any single economic development opportunity I've ever experienced, and I think many people involved in economic development here see it as that.
Is a China hub at Lambert Airport really such a big idea?
No, it's not.
Jack Strauss, the director of the St. Louis University Regional Forecasting Center, believes even if the China hub is successful, it will have less of an economic impact on the region than an auto plant.
So it's not a game changer in St. Louis.
If you want to know how credible we are and how credible this could be, the litmus test for that is the Chinese, not a guy sitting in St. Louis University.
Mike Jones is the chair of the Midwest China Hub Commission, a group dedicated to making the so-called big idea a reality. Jones says Strauss and others not involved in negotiations with the Chinese are simply guessing at what's going on and the impact it will have on St. Louis.
He's like somebody bought a ticket to the ball game and telling you that something's wrong with Albert's swing. Okay, I mean, he's entitled to that opinion, but Albert's not going to pay that any attention. And so I'm too late in the game to care what a guy at St. Louis thinks about this. We're going to close this out.
The key to closing the deal is the Aerotropolis bill. Aerotropolis is a concept that believes you can build a city around a thriving airport. The bill before the Missouri legislature would provide huge tax breaks for private investors, including up to $300 million in tax credits for the construction and equipment costs of developers who will build warehouses.
None of these tax credits are issued prior to any developer building. You have to build the facility, invest your dollars, prove that you're putting cargo in and out of flights traveling internationally out of Lambert, show that you've got jobs affiliated with that, and then you can apply for the tax credit over a 5-year period. So there aren't any, and if no one ever builds, a dollar is never spent.
Lambert's director, Rhonda Homney-Briggy, says those tax credits are spread out over a period of up to 15 years. She says the airport has enough warehouse space to handle a few international cargo flights a week, but it needs much more to turn Lambert into an international cargo hub. Is this a if we build it, they will come idea?
No.
But in some ways, it is. And the more News 4 learned about the Midwest China hub, the more questions we had about it.
We have every bit of evidence that this is going to fail.
Mike Weber, an air cargo consultant who has worked with some of the biggest airports in the country, says Lambert is a terrible choice for an international cargo hub. He says that's because Lambert's landing fees are among the highest in the country, and there's already an abundance of vacant warehouse space at large cargo airports, including some located in the Midwest.
I've never seen such foolhardy, unaccountable public policy around an air cargo effort in North America in my 20 years in the business.
Weber admits a St. Louis China hub could cost O'Hare International Airport in Chicago additional business. Weber is under contract with a consultant who does work with O'Hare, but he insists he's only speaking out because the St. Louis project is doomed, and he says Lambert's failure will hurt funding for more legitimate cargo efforts.
But this is just thievery.
Weber and Strauss aren't the only critics.
I don't think this is the best investment for Missouri.
Amy Bluen is the executive director of the Missouri Budget Project, an independent nonprofit research group that focuses on budget and tax issues. Bluen says the bill doesn't require that a warehouse export a single piece of cargo to get tax credits, and there are no requirements that businesses use Lambert after they are no longer eligible for tax breaks.
We want something as a society that's going to help us with our unemployment rate and help our communities rebuild. This is just not, as it's written currently, the way to go about it.
You could get these tax credits even if you build a warehouse 50 miles away from the airport.
Audrey Spalding, a policy analyst with the Show Me Institute, another statewide think tank, says market research by the firm C.B. Richard Ellis shows that there is 18 million square feet of vacant warehouse space just on the Missouri side of the metro area.
I haven't seen any public demonstration that we're missing warehouse space in St. Louis.
Despite that, only new construction will qualify for the tax credits.
There's absolutely nothing to lose by going after the China hub.
St. Louis Mayor Francis Slay is still convinced the hub can work, partly based on a study conducted by Ed Monser, the chief operating officer for Emerson Electric, ranked by Fortune magazine as the 120th biggest corporation in the country.
He has been to China over 100 times. He understands this very well. He actually did a feasibility study. He believes this can work. His conclusion is that this can work, and he can talk to you about that better than I can.
Monser, identified repeatedly as a point man on the China Hub project, not only refused to talk with us, he also declined to provide us with a copy of the study.
So if somebody has a study out there showing that this could work, I think that should be shared broadly with the public and with the taxpayers.
Who else is pushing for the China Hub, and how will it benefit them? McEagle Properties is developing 2 massive sites near the airport, totaling more than 700 acres. If China Hub operations are built off the airport grounds, McKee and his partners would appear to be at the front of the line.
He was one of the original proponents of this. But this is way bigger than Paul McKee. I mean, he would be a very small part of the whole thing if this thing turns out the way we want it to be.
But McKee and his attorney Steve Stone actually appear to be a very big part of it. In fact, during the last 2 years, Stone has traveled to China 5 times as part of groups sponsored by the Midwest China Hub Commission. That's more than any of the politicians or direct managers of the commission or the airport. Stone and McKee did not respond to our request for interviews.
We didn't do a whole lot of business together.
St. Clair County Board Chair Mark Kern says 5 years ago, McKee and Stone were lobbying China to fly cargo to Mid-America Airport in Mascoutah, Illinois, which is about 40 miles southeast of Lambert. McKee was leasing warehouse space at Mid-America and would spend $683,000 on consultants to help bring Chinese freight there. The key consultant was Stephen Perry of London Export. Perry is Steve Stone's cousin.
Perry and his father have been working with the Chinese for 60 years. His dad led a delegation of British business leaders back in 1953 to meet with Mao, and that began trade relationships between the UK and China, and that has developed over time.
In a letter dated December 15, 2006, Perry wrote to then-Governor Blagojevich, Congressman Costello, and his cousin, Steve Stone. Perry mentioned that he held a series of meetings with high-ranking Chinese officials on behalf of Mid-America. Perry encouraged an Illinois delegation to meet in China in March of 2007. But the agreement reached between McKee and Mid-America began falling apart in the summer of 2007. And just a few months later, Stephen Perry was pitching the so-called big idea to St. Louis politicians and Dick Fleming.
Do you think they took your idea?
I think certainly that our idea is a large part of their plan. The China to South America connection was a connection that was built here at Mid-America, was tested with with test flights from China, with flights from South America. That hasn't occurred at Lambert. That's occurred here, and I think it shows that it can work in the region. We believe it works better at Mid-America.
London Export is now under a $450,000 a year contract with the Midwest China Hub Commission. That contract is paid for by a federal government grant. Do you know how they're spending that $450,000 a year?
Internally? No, I don't. I mean,
does it matter?
Not really.
Federal taxpayers are also paying Steve Stone's law firm $180,000 a year for, quote, furthering the China Hub project, and $180,000 a year for Jason Van Eaton's company Spectrum to manage the Hub Commission. Van Eaton is the former deputy chief of staff for retired Senator Kit Bond. Bond helped get the federal grants paying for those contracts.
You tell me, what is a transformational opportunity for a mid-level region that's in decline worth? Put a number on it.
One of the numbers will likely be the tens of millions of dollars in tax credits for historic housing, the elderly, and the poor that will be cut back to justify the $360 million that could be available to businesses connected to Lambert's China Hub.
It helps me to pay things that I've been struggling with through the year. So it helped me to pay off those things and maybe to get some other things that I need.
Odessa Hollingsworth receives about $300 a year from one of the tax programs facing cuts.
I feel that there are people in this country that live here and they have gave to their community, that the things that they're taken from us should not be taken from us. We should still be eligible for some of the benefits that will help us to be able to manage and to maintain.
There is always a price to pay for what our city leaders call progress. Since 2009, the Midwest China Hub Commission, funded largely by taxpayers, has spent $266,000 in public money, taking politicians, consultants, and executives to China.
If you're St. Louis, you don't really have a choice but to try to make a play like this.
Commission Chair Mike Jones says the region desperately needs to invest in the hub because the old strategy of local cities luring businesses from other nearby communities hasn't cut it.
If we continue to do what we've done for the last 30 years in this region, we're rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic.
Jones says the lifeboat could be China Hub. But who's really in charge of this project? In a series of emails obtained by the Show Me Institute, Stephen Perry seems to be calling the shots, and he criticizes the key players in the St. Louis area for not being on the same page. Let me read you a couple things from a Stephen Perry email. If this bill fails, then Lambert is beyond recovery. Have we really reached that point?
No, I don't think so. But you know, he's our consultant in China, and
he's pretty dramatic guy.
Well,
isn't he?
I think what happens in some of these cases, I mean, some of this stuff is salesmanship as well. What you need to do is you need to get people's attention and say, wait a minute, this is important.
It's the biggest sales job in many years, but there hasn't been a single independent study to see if it will even work.
It's a welfare program, a corporate welfare program.
For who?
For the real estate developers in the St. Louis area. And it's also a jobs program for a bunch of, consultants and lawyers who, frankly, there will never be a moment of accountability for any of these people. You can go back in 5 years and ask the RCGA and, the airport director in St. Louis and Paul McKee and his attorney and those folks. If you go back and ask in 5 years, whether or not it was worth it, they're going to tell you yes, because it wasn't their money to begin with.
The region's power brokers insist they've been open about the China Hub project, but not always. The Midwest China Hub Commission recently forced News 4 to refile an 8-day-old request for documents relating to those high-priced consultants, just because we didn't call it an open records request. We didn't have to, but the impact is the same. An 8-day delay to openness just before the legislature votes on the Aerotropolis bill at next week's special legislative session. Some final words when we come back.